You clicked because you want to know how the Amish keep a full pantry without a freezer, without electricity, without spending a dime at the store all winter. Here is the truth. A basket of apples that would rot on your counter in a week can be turned into food that stays good for 5 years, sometimes longer, using nothing but air, patience, and a method that was old before your grandmother was born. I learned this the hard way, standing in a Lancaster County kitchen at 5 in the morning, watching a woman named Miriam string green beans on a thread like she was making a necklace. I thought she had lost her mind. 15 years later, I understand she was doing something the rest of us forgot how to do. And by the end of this, you will understand it too. I am going to walk you through this the exact way it was walked through for me, stage by stage, each one better than the last. And I am holding back the final stage, the one I found written in an 1844 household record, because once you hear it, you will never look at your kitchen the same way again. This works whether you have a farmhouse or a one-bedroom apartment. Stay with me. Let me take you back to that first morning, because it explains everything. I had come to help with a fence line, a favor for a family that had been kind to me. The husband, Amish, sent me inside to fetch coffee, and that is where I found Miriam, surrounded by bushels of green beans, threading them one by one onto a long cotton string with a needle. I asked her what she was doing. She smiled and said one word I had never heard: breeches, leather breeches. She was making leather breeches, beans, and she told me her mother made them, and her mother's mother made them, going all the way back to when the family came over from the old country. Here is what the first stage taught me, and it is the foundation for everything else. The Amish do not dry food to save money as some clever trick. They dry food because drying is the oldest form of preservation on earth, older than canning, older than salting, older than the ice box. When you pull the water out of food, you take away the one thing that mold, yeast, and bacteria need to live. No water, no rot. It is that simple. And the beauty of it is that it costs almost nothing. Now, Miriam did not have a machine. She had a needle, a string, and the warm air above her wood stove. She threaded whole green beans, pod and all, and hung them across the kitchen like garland. Over the next week they shriveled and turned a dusty leather brown, which is where the name comes from. They looked, honestly, like something you would sweep off the floor. But months later, in the dead of January, she dropped a handful into a pot with a piece of ham and some water and let them simmer half the day. What came out was not a sad, dried-up vegetable. It was rich, smoky, chewy, deep in a way fresh beans never are. The drying changed them. It concentrated them. That was the first thing I got wrong, and I want you to get it right from the start. Dried food is not just preserved fresh food. It becomes something new. The flavor intensifies. A dried tomato tastes 10 times more like a tomato than the fresh one did. A dried apple tastes like the idea of an apple. This is the secret the store-bought fruit leather people don't want you thinking too hard about, because if you understood it, you would stop buying. But here's the question that kept me up that first night. If this is so simple, so cheap, so good, why did almost everybody stop doing it? Why did my own grandmother, who grew up on a farm, never once teach me this? The answer is the second stage, and it makes me angry every time I think about it. Somewhere around the 1940s and 50s, the food industry realized there was more money in selling you a freezer than selling you the electricity to run it, than selling you the frozen food to fill it, then selling you a new freezer when the first one died. Drying food needed none of that. You could not sell a family a machine they did not need. So the knowledge was quietly allowed to fade. It was called old-fashioned. It was called backward. The magazines stopped printing the methods. The extension pamphlets got thinner. And within 2 generations, a skill that every rural household in America once had was nearly gone. The Amish never got that message because they never plugged into the system that was sending it. That is the whole reason this knowledge survived in their kitchens and died in ours. They were not trying to preserve an ancient art. They just never had a reason to stop. Now let me teach you the way Miriam taught me, because the second stage is not just the beans, it is understanding heat. And this is where most people ruin everything before they even begin. The single biggest mistake I see is people cranking the heat too high. They think hotter means faster, and faster means done. It does not work that way. When you dry food too hot, the outside seals shut before the inside can release its moisture. The Amish call this case hardening, though the science books use the same term. You get a piece of fruit that is hard as a rock on the outside and still wet in the middle, and that trapped moisture is exactly where mold takes hold 3 months later. You think you preserved it. You actually built a little factory for rot. The sweet spot Miriam taught me is low and slow. For most fruits and vegetables, you want the air somewhere around 95 to 115 degrees. For herbs, even lower, closer to 90. Meat is its own animal and needs more care, and I will get to that. But the principle holds: low heat, moving air, and time. The moisture leaves the center at the same pace it leaves the surface, and the food dries all the way through, evenly, so it will keep for years instead of weeks. She had no thermometer that first year I watched. She used her hand in the space above the stove and the back of her south-facing porch in summer, where the sun did the work for free. But you do not need her 50 years of instinct. A cheap oven thermometer laid inside your setup tells you everything. And if your oven's lowest setting is 200 degrees, which most are, you simply prop the door open a few inches with a wooden spoon, and that vents enough heat to bring it down into the safe range. That one trick, the wooden spoon in the oven door, is worth the price of admission, and it costs you nothing. So now you understand heat. But heat alone will still leave you with brown, ugly, half-ruined fruit if you skip the step almost nobody talks about anymore. And this is the third stage, the one that separates people who dabble from people who fill a pantry that lasts. The third stage is preparation, and the Amish were masters of it, long before any laboratory confirmed why it worked. Take apples. If you slice an apple and lay it out to dry as is, within 20 minutes it turns brown, and by the time it is dry it looks like something scraped off a boot. The Amish had a word for dried apples: schnitz. It comes from the German for cut, and in Pennsylvania Dutch country there is an entire beloved dish called schnitzennepp, dried apples cooked with dumplings and ham, that goes back to the 1700s. These people dried apples by the barrel, and they knew the trick to keep them pale, sweet, and beautiful. A quick dip in salt water. Just a tablespoon of salt in a quart of water. Let the slices soak 5 or 10 minutes, then drain them. The salt slows the browning enzyme, and, as researchers at agricultural stations later confirmed, it also discourages mold during drying. Some families used a splash of lemon or a weak vinegar dip instead, and vitamin C, ascorbic acid, works even better if you have it. But plain salt water was the everyday method, because everybody had salt. For vegetables, the preparation is different, and this is where the real knowledge lives. Most vegetables need to be blanched first, which means a quick dunk in boiling water, 30 seconds to 3 minutes depending on what it is, and then straight into cold water to stop the cooking. I resisted this for the longest time. It felt like extra work. Miriam finally sat me down and explained it, and the University of Georgia Extension Service, which has studied home drying for decades, backs her up exactly. Inside every fresh vegetable there are enzymes, tiny biological machines that keep ripening and aging the food even after you pick it. Drying alone does not stop them. Blanching does. That quick shot of heat kills the enzymes cold. Skip it, and your dried carrots and beans will keep aging in the jar, losing color, losing flavor, developing off tastes over the months. Blanch them, and they lock in at the peak. That is the difference between food that lasts one season and food that lasts 5 years. Now let me give you the picture of how far this goes, because this is the stage where I stopped being a doubter. That first winter, Miriam opened a cupboard for me. Inside were rows of jars, glass jars catching the lamplight, dried sweet corn that she would simmer back to life so tender you would swear it came off the cob that morning, dried peaches, dried whole tomatoes, green beans, squash rings hung on a dowel, dried sausage, herbs by the fistful. She told me that cupboard, plus her root cellar, carried the family clear through winter into spring, and that in a good year she spent almost nothing at the grocery store between the first hard frost and the first spring greens. Nothing. Think about what that means for your grocery bill. Think about what you throw away right now. The bananas going black on the counter, the berries fuzzing over in the fridge, the garden zucchini you cannot give away fast enough in August. Every bit of that is money, and right now you are letting it rot and then paying full price for the dried and packaged version at the store, where a tiny bag of dried apple rings runs you $6 or $7 for what amounts to 2 apples. 2 apples. You could dry a whole bushel for the cost of running your oven an afternoon. But maybe you are sitting there thinking this is fine for a woman with a farmhouse, a wood stove, and a south-facing porch, but it does nothing for you in your apartment or your small house with your ordinary kitchen. I put this next part in specifically for you because I was once exactly where you are, and I want you to hear me clearly. You do not need any of Miriam's setup. You do not need land. You do not need special permission from anyone. You need what is already in your home right now. If you want to go deeper into everything this knowledge makes possible, I put it all together in a book called The Amish Blueprint, the full system, the forgotten methods, the exact steps for building a pantry that carries your family through any season. It is linked in the description below, and everything in it works in a modern kitchen, no farmhouse required. Take a look when this video is done, and then come back, because what comes next is exactly why this knowledge is worth having. Here is the simplest way to start today, tonight, with nothing new bought, your oven. Set it to its lowest temperature. Prop the door open a few inches with a wooden spoon so the moisture escapes and the heat stays gentle. Slice apples or bananas or tomatoes thin, 1/8 to 1/4 inch. Lay them on a rack set over a baking sheet so air moves underneath, and let them go. Check them every hour or two. In an afternoon, you will pull out your first tray of dried fruit, and I promise you the pride you feel eating that first piece is something the grocery store can never sell you. No oven you want to tie up all day? There is an even older way, and it is free. A window with sun. The Amish and the generations before them dried herbs and thin apple slices and hot peppers in nothing but a sunny window and moving air. Lay your slices on a screen or a clean cloth, set them in a bright window, turn them once a day, and cover them with a single layer of cheesecloth or a thin dish towel to keep the dust and any flies off. In a few days of good sun, you have dried food and you spent absolutely nothing. Herbs are the easiest of all. Tie a small bundle of basil or oregano or mint by the stems, hang it from a cabinet knob in a dry corner of your kitchen, and in a week or two you have jars of dried herbs that cost you nothing, where the store charges $4 and $5 for a thimbleful. You can also use the top of your refrigerator, believe it or not, because it puts out a steady, gentle warmth, and a tray of herbs up there will dry slowly and perfectly. This is what I mean when I say the knowledge fits the life you already have. The Amish did not have fancy equipment either. They had warm air and a place to put it. You have that too. You just never thought to use it. Now, before I give you the final stage, the one I promised, there are 2 things you must know or everything you dry will betray you. And almost nobody teaches these, because almost nobody knows them anymore. The first is conditioning. This is the step that comes after you think you are done, and skipping it is why so many people try drying once, watch their jars mold, and quit forever, convinced it does not work. When food comes out of the oven or off the screen, some pieces are drier than others. That is unavoidable. If you seal them up right away, the moisture from the wetter pieces spreads to the drier ones inside the sealed jar, and you get just enough dampness for mold. So here is what the old timers did, and what I do to this day. You take your dried fruit, loosely fill a glass jar about 2/3 full, put the lid on, and let it sit on the counter for a week to 10 days. Shake it once a day. This lets the moisture even out among all the pieces. If you see any condensation, any fog on the inside of the glass, it was not dry enough, and back it goes for more drying. If it stays clear for the whole week, it is truly done, and now it will keep for years. That one step, conditioning, is the difference between success and a moldy mess. Write it on your hand if you have to. The second thing is the test for doneness, because people always ask me, how do I know when it is dry enough? The Amish taught me by feel, and I will teach you the same way. Fruit should be pliable and leathery, like a raisin, and when you tear a piece in half, there should be no beads of moisture along the tear, no wet line in the center. Vegetables should be brittle, hard, sometimes so dry they shatter when you hit them, and that is correct. Vegetables need to be drier than fruit to keep well. Herbs should crumble to powder between your fingers. If a piece bends without any crispness or leaves any dampness, it is not ready. When in doubt, dry it longer. You cannot over-dry it for storage. You can only under-dry it, and under-dry it is what rots. Now store it right. Glass jars with tight lids are best, kept somewhere cool, dark, and dry. Light is the enemy of dried food, because it bleaches out the color and the nutrients over time, so a dark cupboard or a pantry beats a sunny shelf every time. Keep the jars away from the heat of the stove. And here's a small Amish touch I love. A bay leaf tucked into a jar of dried beans or corn helps keep any insects out. An old trick that works because bugs cannot stand the compounds in the bay leaf. Costs you one leaf, saves you a whole jar. So now you have the full sequence as it was handed to me. The why, the heat, the preparation, the conditioning, the storage. You could stop right here and never buy dried fruit again, and you would already know more than 99 out of 100 people walking around today. But I promised you the final stage, the one I found written down in an old record book, and this is the one that truly blew my mind, because it does the one thing everyone assumes is impossible. It lets you dry food that is normally too wet, too rich, too perishable to ever dry at all. And it turns your dried food into something that lasts not for months, but for years, in the smallest space imaginable. Here it is. The Amish, and the Pennsylvania Dutch before them, did not just dry slices of fruit, they dried purees. They made what we now clumsily call fruit leather, but they took it far beyond a snack. I found the reference in the pattern of old household receipt books from the 1840s, the handwritten kind families kept, where a homestead cook recorded cooking down apples and plums and pumpkin into a thick paste, spreading it thin on lightly greased boards or cloth, and drying it in the sun into sheets they could roll up and store in a fraction of the space. But the genius, the part I never saw coming, is what they did with those sheets. They did not just eat them as candy. They tore them up and dropped them back into winter cooking to instantly thicken and flavor and enrich a dish. Dried pumpkin leather, torn into a pot, became pumpkin soup or the filling for a pie. Dried apple leather melted back into applesauce or sweetened to pork roast. Dried tomato leather, and this is the one that changed my whole kitchen, became instant tomato paste, instant sauce, the deep concentrated heart of a soup. From a paper-thin sheet you could store a dozen of in a single jar. Think about what that solves. Tomatoes are wet. Everyone says you cannot really dry a fresh tomato at home without it turning to mush or molding, and slicing them is fiddly and slow. But when you cook them down first into a thick puree, spread that puree 1/8 of an inch thin on a lined tray, and dry it low and slow into a leather, you sidestep the whole problem. The cooking concentrates it, the thinness dries it evenly and fast, And what you get is a shelf-stable sheet of pure tomato that takes up almost no room, weighs almost nothing, and rehydrates in minutes into rich sauce. A whole flat of summer tomatoes, the kind you can get for pennies at the end of the season, becomes a stack of leather sheets that will flavor your cooking deep into next year. And it works with the very things you are throwing away right now. Overripe bananas, too soft to slice, blend perfectly into banana leather. Berries going soft in the fridge. Cook them down and dry them into fruit sheets your grandchildren will beg for, with no added sugar, nothing but the fruit. The apples bruised in the bottom of the bag, the plums nobody ate, the pumpkin left over from a pie, all of it, food you would have scraped into the trash, becomes the longest lasting, most compact, most useful thing in your pantry. The method is simple enough to do this week. Take your fruit, remove any pits or bad spots, and cook it down gently in a pot until it is soft and thick, stirring so it does not scorch. For fruit that browns, a squeeze of lemon keeps it bright, blended smooth. Then line a tray with parchment or a lightly oiled sheet and pour the puree on about 1/8 of an inch thick, no thicker, spreading it even with the back of a spoon. Into your low oven with the door propped, or into a sunny window under cloth, and let it dry until the whole sheet is no longer sticky in the center but peels away like soft leather. It usually takes longer than slices, sometimes the better part of a day, but you can do a huge batch on one tray. Peel it off, roll it up, and store the rolls in a jar in a cool, dark place. Condition them the same way, checking for any moisture, and they will keep for a year and more. That is the stage they saved for last in that old kitchen, and now I have handed it to you the way it was handed to me. From wet, perishable, thrown-away fruit to concentrated food that outlasts the winter and barely takes up a shelf, that is the thing the freezer companies never wanted you to figure out, because a family that can do this does not need much of anything they are selling. I think about Miriam threading those beans in the lamplight, and I understand now that she was not being quaint. She was holding on to something the rest of us were tricked into throwing away, a way to feed a family through the cold months on the abundance of the warm ones, using nothing but air, sun, and knowledge that costs not 1 cent. That knowledge did not disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because there was more money in you for getting it. You are the kind of person who suspects that a lot of what got labeled old-fashioned was really just knowledge that made you too independent to be a good customer. If you have felt that in your gut, you were right, and now you have the proof in your own kitchen. So let me ask you something, and I want you to actually answer me. Which one are you going to try first? The wooden spoon in the oven door to dry a tray of apples tonight, or the tomato leather that turns a flat of summer tomatoes into a year of sauce? Tell me in the comments, because I read them, and tell me where you are watching from, because I love knowing how far this old knowledge is traveling. And if you have your own family method, something your grandmother did that I did not mention, put it down there too, because that is exactly how we keep these things from vanishing. If you believe, like I do, that real useful knowledge has been quietly pushed aside so somebody else could keep profiting off your dependence, then you belong here with the rest of us who are digging it back up one method at a time. Subscribe and stand with us, because the next thing I am going to show you is how the Amish keep butter and eggs good for months without a refrigerator, a method so simple you will wonder how the whole country forgot it. That one changed my kitchen even more than this did, and I cannot wait to walk you through it. I will see you there. Before you go, let me say one thing. This video gave you the overview, but inside the Plain Living Society, you get the full leather breeches method right through that final secret I held back. And if you get stuck, ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. You belong here with us. Just point your phone at the code on your screen, cancel anytime, one click,